Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Kristoff, and today's episode has been a long time coming. I've been thinking about, beavers as a species and the ecological importance of beavers for a long time. They're a keystone species in our environment. We need them to create habitat. They're ecological engineers. They create so much habitat and are so crucially important to the boreal forest, and we really, really need them. And not just that, they've been of economic importance to Canada and the United States. Our economies, the original economy of these two nations were built off of arguably, beaver fur. And I wanted to bring in Bill Abercrombie. He's the president, I believe, of the Alberta Trappers Association. He's part of the Alberta Conservation Association. He's also a seasoned outdoorsman, and he teaches people how to, outdoor skills and how to trap and how to do all kinds of different stuff. And he's been heavily involved with the outdoor community for a long time. Great dude. He'll explain himself a little bit later, but we talked about beavers was the main thing and got into trapping, and it was awesome. I really liked having him on. Very well thought out. For those of you who kind of are averse to the idea of trapping, I hope you'll check this one out and just listen, and you'll see that, they're not what you think they are. It's not this like crazy Disney view of it where they're wanting pain and suffering and this weirdness, right? It's all about sustainable harvest, and it's all about trying to achieve a goal of population dynamics and all kinds of different stuff. And it was a great conversation. I hope you guys will listen to it. We definitely talked at the beginning a lot about the importance of beavers, how they, impact the ecology around them, why they're important to, like, for all kinds of different purposes, environmentally as well as economically. And then we got into a bit about, that wildland urban interface, when it comes to kind of conflict with beavers and human beings and how to deal with those situations and the toolkit involved. It's not just trapping them. It's, you know what I mean? There's all kinds of tools involved. There's pond levelers and all kinds of stuff that you can use to try and make sure that the beavers are still there, and that you can watch them and enjoy them and experience how they manipulate their landscape and all kinds of different stuff and be a part of that experience, right? And you can control the numbers to the point where it doesn't become a problem. It doesn't force your house to fall into the river because they're, creating erosion and all kinds of different stuff like that. There's a way that we can coexist together. They're amazing species. Very few other, we're arguably the closest other ecological engineer that exists is humans. I don't even know if we do it as good a job as they do. So I hope you guys like it. Bill's an awesome dude. Let's get into it. Thanks a lot for coming on, first of all. And let's just, maybe you just want to explain who you are, kind of how you're involved with all the different organizations, and let's go from there.
Okay, sure. My name is Bill Abercrombie. I'm a professional hunter and trapper. That's where my skill set comes from. I run a business called Animal Damage Control. We do wildlife conflict mitigation and management, and we do research and consulting and logistics, all kinds of stuff. I'm also board chair of the Alberta Conservation Association. My member group to that is the Alberta Trappers Association, one of the founding groups of the ACA, and I also sit as president of that organization as well. My business, my passion really, and my two boys who work in the family business with me is wildlife management, conservation, research, all those aspects of it. That's what we do, and we've been doing that for about 30 years. My boys and I, have been working together for almost 20 years since they were little kids. Really.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, it is awesome.
And reading from your website too, it sounds like you had a family history with that too, prior to yourself. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my immediate parents, my mom was a real conservationist, environmentalist teacher. Mm-hmm. She founded the Edmonton Anti-Pollution Group.
Oh, nice.
I'm not even sure if that still exists.
I haven't heard of it,
back in the 60s, right?
Right. Sounds like a good idea, though.
Well, yeah. Always looking for a cause. She was just obsessed with Canadian history. And that's what kind of got me really, the whole fur trade thing and trappers and living on the land. And it just seemed so well, when you're a kid, I mean, it's just the coolest thing ever. And my dad was my facilitator for that because my dad was a lawyer.
Okay.
But his other passion was the outdoors.
Yeah.
And he was kind of like a gentleman hunter, but he spent the time with me.
Yeah.
As a kid,
nice.
Out in the bush all the time.
Yeah.
And so I developed a lot of the skills with my dad. And then, and there's history there too. My great uncle Frank was a cowboy and a wilderness trapper up in the Peace Country. Okay. Frank Hudson, right? He and his brother Charlie homesteaded in what is now the Hudson Hope area in northeast BC.
That's awesome.
He was on the Beddoe expedition as one of the wranglers. With the insane British guy, try to cross the Rockies and all that. Yeah, but I mean, he was one of the cowboys there. He used to buy and train horses in Edmonton and run them up to the Peace Country.
Oh, okay.
And sell them and then go trap for the winter and come back down to the same thing. He was a real character.
So you got a lot of a lot of history with being
I got that
in the outdoors.
I got that blood, I think, you know, and I've this is a way for me. Trapping has always been a way for me to try to make a living being on the land. Mm-hmm. And my wife had the same passion. I mean, she's a lawyer too.
Okay.
Now judge, but I mean, she was a wrangler and for an outfitter for years and years. That's how she put herself through university. We had a dream to live on the land. When we got married, we homesteaded in Alaska right after we got married.
Really? That's awesome.
Us and our dog team in the middle of nowhere.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty wicked. Yeah. That's unheard of this day and age, right?
Yeah. No, everyone thought we were just crazy.
I imagine it's probably the best decision you ever made.
There was this foundation for our marriage and for our lives.
That's wicked.
It was the best. So I mean, now she's still part of that. My wife and I still do wilderness canoe trips together, but my boys and I, the focus is on, not just even so much a business now, but conservation and education, facilitating as much research as we can. Mm-hmm. I think people with skills in the bush and trapping skills, but logistics, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Helps better research get done. So we try to do as much of that as we can.
You're sure you guys are helping with research with universities and the government and that kind of stuff?
With the ACA, with universities, with government, with private groups. Yeah,
that's awesome. You guys have the knowledge, right? The on the ground information.
Yeah, so and the willing to work. I think trappers in general have a long history of doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
And we keep doing it.
It's all about the balance, right?
It is, yeah.
For sure. So I imagine with all your guys' time, like I was telling you before, the reason I wanted to bring you in here was to talk about the beaver specifically because it's such an iconic creature, like
one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the Canadian national animal, right? Like it's arguably the basis on which our Canadian economic prosperity was built.
For Alberta, it is. It's the earliest settlement in Alberta was in Fort Chip, and that was for one reason only, for the fur industry and primarily for beaver in that area, in the Athabasca Delta.
Yeah, and they're just on top of all of that, they're such a ecologically important species, right? They're keystone species. A lot of people have said, and they're one of the only. One interesting way I heard somebody explain it. It was another beaver researcher, and she said, how did she word it exactly?
I could probably quote her because I probably know who you're talking about.
She lives down south.
Hood.
Yes, Glennis Hood, yes.
Sure.
And she said something about the comparison between beavers and humans, right? Like they're the only other creature that we know of that manipulates their environment arguably is similar to what we do. They're ecological engineers, the same as humans are, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that they create all this habitat and all. But we'll get into that. So let's
and sometimes with utter disregard for what they're doing and the impact of what it is. The beavers are the same,
kind of like us. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like
they just don't stop. They keep going till it's all gone.
Yeah, it's all about just doing what you need to do until you got what you need.
Absolutely. Yeah,
and that we're the same way. Arguably, it's interesting the comparison there, right?
Yeah.
So for people that don't know, I think there's people listening that might not really know kind of what a beaver is, what they are all about. So let's just do a quick little like rundown on like what a beaver is, how they live. So like how big do beavers get? First of all, they're a big rodent, right? They have a big flat tail on them. Yeah. They get pretty big, right? Like we're talking they get
the biggest beaver I ever caught was when I was 15 years old, and I've never caught a bigger one. It was a 106-pound female.
That's insane. 106. I've never heard of 106 pounds. I've heard of
of a few bigger, but only by a few pounds.
Oh my goodness!
I know a trapper up in Alaska caught one bigger once, but
holy. That's insane. So these these are huge animals. Do they have thumbs? This question came up in the podcast a while ago because they carry stuff, right? Do they have thumbs?
Yeah,
they do have thumbs.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
So they can grip and they can
the
hold
human
on.
hand of a beaver actually very closely resembles beavers, raccoons, animals that are very dexterous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it very, very closely resembles a human hand.
I thought they did. It came up in another podcast. I couldn't answer it.
Yeah.
Right. So they can grab onto stuff. So I guess that's another tool by which they can manipulate their environment, right?
Absolutely,
that's what makes them such
It's a very valuable tool for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they eat all wood?
No.
Okay. So this is something because I asked somebody this a while ago because my understanding is that they create dams to flood areas to store wood so they can eat in the wintertime. But would they eat, like, are they opportunists the same as every other animal out there? They'll eat?
No, they're not opportunists.
Okay.
No,
so
they're an animal that has to create and facilitate its own survival. So it's got to create its own habitat suitable for it to survive. Okay. So they don't eat wood. They eat the bark off deciduous trees. Its very favorite is the balsam poplar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or the trembling aspirin, because and they just eat the green bark. Got to be a green tree.
Right.
They'll also eat willows and birch. They just love ornamental fruit trees and all that kind of stuff. That's their favorite. But they don't eat the wood. They'll also go out and just graze on deciduous growth. I've seen them eat alfalfa. I've seen them eat bird's foot trefoil. I've seen them eat dandelions. I've seen them grazing on grass down in Fort Edmonton Park beside White Mud Creek in the spring. Sometimes you'll see that when, especially when they're living on a creek or a river system.
Yeah.
So it's not like in a pond where all the food they have cached for the winter, there's some left over for the spring until things kind of melt.
Right.
They might lose it all in a big runoff, and then they got to just go get whatever's around.
Gotcha.
And start knocking trees down again. So, yeah.
Gotcha. So they eat, my understanding is they eat it's the cambium layer, right? It's the like just under the bark, that kind of fleshy part of the tree, right? That's the part that they eat, or is it the bark itself?
The bark itself.
Oh, okay.
They eat the bark right down to the wood.
Okay.
If you're ever around the North Saskatchewan River in town on shore, and you look and you see a bright peeled white stick, that's a very good sign of beaver activity is there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start kind of this way maybe. So a beaver wanders into an area hoping to create its own. So it wanders into an area hoping to create its own home, right? Yeah. So let's walk through the process. How does it go about that?
It depends very much on what kind of habitat it is and what kind of ecosystem, whether it's a lake, whether it's a river, whether it's a creek, a small pond.
Let's say a creek.
A creek. Quite often they'll go there, and if there's enough water for at least so they can get underwater into a den or something like that, you won't even know they're there for the first part. They're very sketchy and kind of furtive in their behavior. Number one, because this is a time when they're most vulnerable. So if they're going to get nailed by a predator, this is one of the times that they're very vulnerable for that until they kind of feel it out. And they'll find a hole in the bank or dig one under the surface of the water, and they'll live there for a week or two. And then at this time, they're also testing flow and that in the creek. And is this a viable place to actually colonize, or do I need to move on?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't take them very long to figure that out. And this is not cookie cutter. Some beavers make smarter decisions than others.
Kind of like people.
Some of them make really stupid decisions. I've seen beavers try to set up in spots, and this is not viable for them at all.
Yeah.
But generally, what you see is a 2-year-old beaver, a male, usually out of a colony.
Okay.
He's got the boot from the adult male because he's breeding age now, and the adult male doesn't want him there.
Okay.
Or the situation with food and resources and all that, the adult males run out all the teenage beavers because they're going to breed again, the adult male and female, and they don't want the other ones around.
Yeah.
So most beavers that show up alone somewhere are anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 years old.
Okay.
They show up there, and the first thing he's going to do is start building a dam, and it can start off small. But it does not take them very long because, and I hear this from people, they went out there and it seems like overnight, all of a sudden there's a 1-meter dam there. And once the beaver has that built, likely he's going to build another one and another one.
Gotcha.
There's multiple reasons for that. Most of it is engineering. One dam cannot stand by itself. It needs another dam down below, holding up water, and the water acts as support for the upper dam, and they keep going like that.
Okay.
But they also, it's an animal, when they're out of water, and they have to go cut trees for food, as soon as they're out of water and they're on the ground, they're now vulnerable to predators. And here's the thing about beavers a lot of people don't understand, is that in the wild or anywhere, the biggest delicacy for any predator big enough to kill a beaver is beaver.
Yeah. Because
of the high protein and high fat content in a beaver, which can mean the difference between survival or not to a wolf or a bear or a cougar or an otter. This is one thing people don't know about otters. Otters are one of the major predators of beavers.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, especially in the northern boreal forest. Coyotes, maybe the babies, but they don't get a chance at them very often.
How's an otter going about killing a beaver? To drown him or something, or what?
An otter is, I know when you watch movies.
The carnivores, I know, but
they're a member of the weasel family. They're
right.
a great, big, strong weasel. They're one of the largest members of the weasel family.
Oh, okay.
And they're playful and all that, yeah. But there's a side of them that most people never see. The reality is, an otter's a killing machine, and they sometimes, older males or a non-breeding female will be by themselves, but mostly they're in groups.
Okay.
And what they do is they'll go to a beaver dam or even right at the lodge, but mostly they'll go to a dam, chew a hole through the dam from the bottom, go up under the ice, and now they can enter the beaver lodge in the winter. Or if it's summertime, they just swim up and go in. The otters have a hard time with the large adults, and there's a Donnybrook goes on in that beaver lodge and around in the beaver pond fighting. But in the end, they'll kill every kit, every subadult, every juvenile beaver in there, and maybe 1 or 2 of the adults are gone.
I never thought about it. So otters have they're all canines just like any other predator.
They're a
right?
weasel.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So they're vicious then, yeah.
Picture a weasel in a hen house, and now picture an otter in a beaver lodge.
Yeah.
Same thing.
They're comparative size, are they not?
They are.
Yeah.
Which makes it tough on the beavers. Yeah. But this is the other thing most people don't realize about beavers is that a 50-pound plus adult beaver is a match for an otter.
I'll say they probably knock them out with that big heavy tail they got or something, right? No?
No. The beaver's teeth are like 2 sets of cold chisels.
Yeah.
And they have tremendous musculature around the head and jaws, and they can take a limb right off a coyote or an otter or something. Quite a few coyotes, otters, when they swim in, they grab a young beaver on the way out, the adult's on them. And so as a trapper, when you know that he's been fighting beavers, because when you catch an otter and then you're skinning him, there'll be old wounds all over his back with the beaver biting him, and as he's out heading out of the lodge with a young beaver in his jaws.
Man.
So
nature,
you know,
it's just it
is what it is.
It's cruel. It's cruel, but it's not even cruel. It's just nature. That's what it is.
That's right. That's life and death.
Life and death. Yeah. Something has to die for anything else to survive, right? Even plants need it. So yeah. It's so. Anyways, get back into the. I got carried away on that.
Oh,
I wanted to know, but okay. So they're building this dam. So is the main reason that they start building a dam, is that for protection? That's for avoidance?
That's one of the main reasons. It's their. They build the dam to raise the water at the level and to keep it consistent. Yeah. So, and they have to have the water deep enough. Number one, to avoid predators. Mm-hmm. Number two, to facilitate travel in that environment in deep enough water where they can escape from predators. But the key thing in this climate for beavers is they have to have the water deep enough so that in the fall, when they really start cutting trees, all those trees are cut up and stored in the bottom of that pond in front of the lodge or the den where the beavers are living. Mm-hmm. And that's their winter food supply. Mm-hmm. So the water has to be deep enough because the ice is going to freeze down, but it can't freeze down too much where they are obstructed from accessing that feed pile for the winter. And it's very simple. They'll swim out, they'll cut off a stick, swim back in the lodge, peel it like corn on the cob, shoot the peeled stick out of the run, go get another one. This is what they do all winter long. So they're very active in the winter.
Okay, so they don't hibernate then?
Not at all. Oh. No, this is why they have to have that whole setup to feed themselves and survive in the winter. Some beaver colonies, they're very much affected by weather. Mm-hmm. Now, the phenomena that we have in the northern climates of it warming up in January to plus 15, all the snow melts, the ice is exposed, and it goes to 30 below again, right like now.
Yeah.
And this is killing weather for beavers and muskrats and other semi-aquatic fur bearers that have to live underneath the ice in the wintertime. Because in many wetland ecosystems, the ice now, if it's sustained, will freeze right to the bottom of the pond
because it's so cold.
Yeah. And then whatever is in there, beavers survive better than any other species, but most of everything else would be dead in there. So snow is what protects them. Because in the wintertime, an active beaver lodge, you might have 3 feet of ice out in the middle of the pond, and around the lodge there's no ice because of the activity of the beavers around that lodge. So
and the snow just insulates the ice enough to keep the really cold air temperature from
and from above. And remember that a lot of water systems produce gas and all that that collects, and that also keeps ice from forming under the snow. So it's a funny thing about how that works, but beavers depend on that for survival.
So they when they do this, like, I don't think it's intentional, but as an unintentional positive, I guess, for beavers being around, they create habitat for uncountable number of species that otherwise would have a real hard time existing, correct?
Yeah. Well, they often, it depends where it is they set up. Because remember, when they flood an area, they're destroying habitat as well.
True.
So they create habitat for certain species, but they limit habitat, for others. Right. So, but the reality is wetlands tend to be more beneficial than just a stand of poplars in a ravine or something like that.
They're a little more, less common, right? There's
exactly. As far as wetland creation goes, beavers are critical for that. And even after the beavers have, and the transition from wetland, which it always occurs, the transition from wetland back to just a tiny trickle of water, because the beavers have literally eaten themselves out of house and home, is actually almost as important as the wetland itself, because they have now created critical habitat, because what comes after, the soil in there is tremendously rich from all the beaver poop, mostly.
So basically after all the water's receded.
Once the water is gone, all the dams have blown out, the beavers have moved because they have to.
Right.
Because once they eat more than 50 meters from water to shoreline, that's about as far as they can go. And then the bears and wolves and all that really start picking them off because they're too far away from the water and they start getting nailed. You know, and the quality of food is probably not what it would be closer to the water. And so the beavers, once they have consumed that, need to move on, or quite often, if they're short of food for one winter, they come under stress. And as soon as any wild animal or any living animal, including people, when you're under stress, you're more vulnerable, of course, to disease and parasites, and that happens to beavers. When they're in a colony, whatever one gets, they all get. So you can see entire drainages filled with beavers just annihilated from tularemia or hepatitis or something like that. Okay. And that's very common, right? Especially in more remote areas, you know, where there are still large colonies of beaver.
Gotcha.
So
when they move out,
when they're gone, all the dam without the beavers there to maintain them, the dams are gone.
So the dams need constant attention.
Yep. Right, okay. Yeah, they need constant attention. Without the beavers there, they fracture, they blow out and spring runoff. But now it creates another critical habitat. And the regeneration that occurs there, as far as ungulates go, and plant growth, grasses that wouldn't be there because a lot of this happens in the forest, and there's no open areas. There's no transition from riparian habitat to, you know, mature timber, that sort of thing. Right. Well, the beaver creates that transition, and if you know anything about ecology, it's the transition from one, biome to the next. You know, the small little ecosystems inside the big one, from wetland to and muskeg to big timber and all that. That's where all the best habitat is. Right. That's where the food is, and that's where the animals are. So they're beneficial even after they're gone.
And so you're saying that there's so much. There's a huge organic layer created when that clears out. So it's super, super rich. Yeah. It's ripe for good vegetation growth and all kinds of interesting species of plants all
kinds of stuff. You know, and it's fun. It's amazing because you'll go there. What most people don't realize is they'll see the beaver lodge out in a pond or something, you know, in a creek. Yeah. But the reality is, underneath the surface of the water, the bank around that whole area is just going to look like Swiss cheese. They're very aggressive diggers and tunnelers. So they're also creating all kinds of habitats for all kinds of animals that wouldn't be there. And you see, you know, porcupines and all kinds of other rodents deading in old beaver lodges. The bank changes with beaver activity there, creates a lot more siltation in the water, and the dams collect that in the creek. So it just creates more habitat, more nutrients. More plants that would grow in there that you would not see otherwise in just a small little creek. So it's you know, it's basically it transitions from one to the other. Yeah. And then once you get regeneration of the trees in the area, sure enough, another beaver shows up and the whole
cycle
thing starts again.
Yeah. But it's, everywhere I go, everyone that the researchers that talk about it, they talk about the crucial aspect of them and how they're so unique on the landscape that we, you know what I mean? We need them, and they just, there's nothing that does what they do, right? No. And it's just like, it's fascinating to see that such a small animal, I guess 100 pounds isn't small, but
well, no, that's the extreme. I mean, the average adult beaver is, 20 kilograms.
Okay.
Would be about the average
40,
size.
50 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. So, the other thing too is just, the retention of water, groundwater specifically on the landscape, is better done by just about. There's no other species that does it the way they do, and the maintenance of that. So, groundwater levels are better. You have more seepage of water into the rest of the ecosystem away from the pond, underground, all the things that are critical for healthy habitats, not just the beaver drainage itself, but everything around that area depends on it. So their impact is felt, beyond just the ecosystem they created.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to something with Glennis Hood the other day, and she said something about in non-boreal, she said that there was like a 70% reduction in wetlands. So I'm guessing she means in kind of the prairie landscape where we create a lot of agriculture and that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's been a massive reduction in wetlands and therefore a massive reduction in beavers, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I wonder what kind of an impact that had. I mean, it's a different landscape now that they've been removed, but...
Well, a big where there is wetlands, there's a lot of beavers.
Oh, I couldn't agree. I look at the forest every day I look at aerial photography every day of the forest, and every single creek or stream or whatever you run across, you can see either a current like existing or an old beaver dam or something. Right, they're everywhere. Like they're just in the boreal. They're littered with them. But.
And it's a love-hate relationship. I mean, sometimes in times of drought, which we've actually seen a lot of in this area. For agriculture, beaver dams and beavers are very valuable. And then it gets to the point where, farmers have hundreds of acres of crop underwater from dams on creeks. Well, then it's...
The human conflict side for sure is big. Yeah. You can imagine, like we were saying earlier, right? You've got the human beings that are, you know what I mean? We alter our landscape to fit our needs, and we got the beavers that alter their landscape to fit their needs, and we seem to want the same kind of areas, right? And it's like, so the conflict is, anyways, but I want to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, that's fine.
Definitely want to go there though, for sure, because that's an important part of the story, definitely. I imagine like for like ducks and waterfowl and that kind of stuff, they depend on beaver existence as well, right? Like I imagine Ducks Unlimited is a big proponent of keeping beavers around.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
Ducks Unlimited is a big proponent of keeping beavers around until there's too many beavers, and then all their weirs to hold water wind up getting jammed up and plugged up. And so, I mean, it's just we'll get into that part later, but in terms of waterfowl in the Aspen Parkland and on the prairies, beavers are critical for that. And not just waterfowl, for all kinds of birds. All the trees that die from being flooded by beaver habitation create then now another habitat for all kinds of other bird species to live in those trees, and not just woodpeckers and all that, but they also, those trees now become habitat for a lot of insects that songbirds feed on. And then it's critical habitat also for raptors.
Yeah.
It's not just waterfowl, it's all kinds of species.
No, it's wild.
Tend to just accumulate around beaver drainages because of that. Yeah.
For sure. Well, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it, was because I think in our current society, when we come into that, that wilderness and human kind of that zone where the humans and the wilderness kind of meet, right? And you have beavers living with people in the same area. And I feel like a lot of landowners, when they get a beaver on their land or doing something, that their immediate reaction is get rid of it because it's flooding my land, my house is going to flood, or my crops or whatever, right? And they want to get rid of it, and I think that's only fair, right? But it's interesting to note that again, it was another thing like Glennis Hood said. She said human beings are the most invasive species on the planet, right? It's like it's an interesting perspective to be like we're arguably equally or more invasive as any beaver ever would be, right? And beavers
much more so.
And beavers aren't invasive; they're native to Canada, right? So it's an interesting balance to think about beavers as an ecological necessity in a very truthful way to make sure that our ecology in the boreal forest stays the way it is, but also there's this huge conflict with people that gets so much attention, right? And it's how do you balance out? How do you create a system?
Well, you said the key word yourself is balance, so
right? The coexistence,
you
right?
have to and that's possible, absolutely. It's just that most people, the way to accomplish that is for people who don't really understand how nature works,
Mm-hmm.
the process of that, is quite often unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, in terms of how nature works, it is a way. So if you go to a wilderness area,
Mm-hmm.
and we still have some of that in northern Alberta, say in the Birch Mountains, northwest of Fort McMurray,
Okay.
and a lot of the smaller meandering rivers around there, there's just thousands of beavers living in there.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, for every mile of drainage there that is occupied by beavers,
Mm-hmm.
there's at least an equal mile or 2 miles that is not.
Mm.
And the reality is that in nature, the process is different
Mm-hmm.
than it is in a populated area, because beavers literally are allowed to live out their existence to the end of where they just destroy themselves.
Mm.
And that's what they do. They render all the sustainable resources out of the habitat they're in.
Mm.
And then there's either not enough food and they have to move and abandon it,
Mm-hmm.
or they die of disease.
Kind of like people, once again.
Exactly, yes. So, but in large areas, that whole process plays itself out, and that's fine. But when you're in populated areas, to allow that process to play itself out is not sustainable.
No,
because the results at near the end are catastrophic. For agriculture and infrastructure, for people, that sort of thing. And the reality is that if you manage the population of beavers in those areas, it doesn't actually ever get to the catastrophic end the beaver faces, because if you're removing some beavers from the ecosystem, then you're managing the population, and the habitat continues to sustain them at a reasonable level, where there can be coexistence between agriculture and landowners and municipalities with infrastructure and parks right in the city, all of that stuff. But there is no real other way. And it's better for the overall beaver population that happens, because there's not enough predators either to control the population. But that doesn't really happen in the wild either. It's mostly disease.
It's that argument that
controls beavers.
Instead of having that normal cyclic, I guess normal is a weird word, but having that cyclic nature of population levels where they rise and fall with resource availability, we as human beings have the capacity to stabilize that population
if you're thoughtful about how it's done. So I do this. It's one of the things that we do for a living. So if you're thoughtful about what you're doing, know what you're looking at when you're assessing beaver habitation, and what is appropriate in order to manage, but also at the same time sustain beavers in there. And then if you're humane and respectful about how you trap the beavers, make sure you're humane, make sure you utilize them, pay respect for the animal, because all animals deserve respect. So utilize the fur, the meat, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that in a way is kind of the perfect cycle of how this goes. And that really, 500,000 years ago, or even 20,000 years ago, that's what human beings did too. Was that? Well, I mean, they were a piece of the ecosystem, and they had their impact. Yeah. But it was a sustainable impact. And so, as far as beavers go, we just have to get back to the sustainable part, and then it's all good.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way to put it as well, because people tend to see, for some reason, and I bring this up often, I don't know why people tend to see human beings as outside of the ecosystem, as outside of nature, as not part of it, right? Because if you leave whatever, a beaver population to its natural causes, it'll fluctuate and they'll die of disease or overpopulation and starvation, or they'll be predated on or whatever, right? And they're gonna die horrible deaths because that's the way nature works.
Yes.
But as soon as we step in as thoughtful managers, understanding those population dynamics and understanding all the inputs and trying to, have an arguably peaceful ending to their life. I mean, relative to being eaten alive, right? And this is a weird argument because there's a lot of people right now who are probably screaming into the, screaming at their headphones going like, what are you talking about? Like there's no like, whatever, you know what I mean? The whole ethical killing of animals argument, right? But, it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of people see human beings as outside of nature and not part of it. And that some reason us utilizing resources is somehow bad or wrong, or we're part of nature, the same as everything else. And if we have the tools by which to help nature along in a sustainable way so that it doesn't have these massive wild fluctuations and it doesn't affect the rest of nature in an improper way. Like if we can stabilize that and try to help that along, why wouldn't we, right? And especially when it comes in conflict with us, right? With our infrastructure and our livelihoods and it's costing us and that kind of stuff. And it's like you said, sustainability is key, right? And we have the tools by which to do sustainable harvest and all that,
look,
right?
The reason we're in the state we are on this planet is for the reasons that you just stated. Is that the idea that human beings are not part of that and we're some kind of foreign violator of nature, when the reality is that the destiny of human beings is very much being played out in the cycle of nature right now as we're sitting here talking.
Absolutely.
It's just different, right? And it's such for human beings that sits on a massive scale, but don't for 1 minute think that there's not an end game here.
Yeah, oh yeah.
There is. So, so for human beings, the relationship was different back in historic times simply by numbers. Human beings didn't impact that much because there wasn't that many around in a lot of areas. Well, now that has changed. But the reality is we can have the same process just by being thoughtful about what we're doing and realizing that we are very much part of the same cycle. And whether human beings live in a city or on a farm or wherever they live, the impact on resources of this planet and on the natural cycle where those resources are being utilized is dramatic. And for those that live in a city, more so than anything else, right? Yeah. Because the demand for resources to support that urban environment, has tremendous impact on
Big
the
time.
Natural world, right? So,
of course,
but yet those people are the most out of touch with the natural world because they don't live there, and even though there's little natural worlds and parks and stuff like that, it's not really the same because they're not getting exposed to the reality of how nature is and how it operates. So, I mean, there are hard realities in nature. The number one is that animals, including humans, are born and they die. And enough has to die in order to make room for the ones that are born. And that's where the balance has to be, is that, our biggest problem on this planet is there's not enough death. And it's hard for people to accept that. But we have about 5 billion too many people. Yeah. Here for the resources that we have.
Well, it's like you were saying with the beaver, right? You're saying the beaver utilizes all its resources.
It's a smaller case of exactly the same scenario, and you know what? It's the same for every other living thing. Yeah, and so, we have as human beings the capacity that a lot of other animals don't have. We have the capacity to be thoughtful and compassionate and respectful, and still be part of the cycle of life and death, but in a way that is human, in the good part.
And I think directly involved is better than being indirectly involved.
But it is.
A lot of people think that if they can remove themselves from the cycle some way, because it's all a cycle, right? Like if you take yourself away from that directly, you're somehow not involved with that ecological issue, right? But you're still involved. It's just an indirect location, right? But if you can become directly involved with the problem and directly interact with it and see it and change your methods with it, then that's a better way to do it. Sure, you sometimes you have to get your hands dirty and you have to do some stuff that you might not want to do, but that's what allows you to make the right decision because you see it, right?
Well, getting your hands dirty and doing not what you might not want to do. All it is something that's foreign to what you know, right?
For sure.
I take people from all over the world out on the trap line and in the bush, and some of them, and I take students from schools out there and everything, and they participate in actually the process of living and sustaining and hunting and trapping and that. And the reality is this, and I can't think of anyone who, after even a short time being exposed to the reality of that existence, it is a profound impact on how that person sees himself in the world, and they look at the life that they had been leading up until that point and what that means, and the stress and the competition and just the constant bombardment of everything human and the urban lifestyle. And then they're out there, and even though, yes, I killed an animal and I cooked it and I ate it, and I skinned it and I used its fur and its bones and all that, but I paid respect to that animal, and even I was a little bit sad when I did it. But and it's not just the adrenaline, but the feeling of being part of something that is so close to what life and existence and the cycle of nature was and is on this planet. I've had people sit and cry, and I ask them what's wrong, and they'll say, I'm feeling things that I've never felt in my life. And I said, well, how does it make you feel overall? I said, it makes me feel like a human being, like alive, and it's like I've been dead or numb,
missing something
to everything that's been going on around me. Right. And so, I'm not saying the whole world has to be part of that, but I think that knowledge of that and, being respectful of that and actually considering that sort of traditional knowledge and lifestyle as kind of a template in our decision-making for coexistence and sustainability is very beneficial, and, nobody's, people think that they're immune from all that kind of thing, but, that's not really a good thing. The acceptance of life and death, not just for animals, but for human beings and all of that. When you really experience that, I'll tell you what, you tend to have a lot more respect for life.
Big time.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. No,
and more respect for the people who live off the land and they utilize the resources there, including the animals and everything. The compassion and the love that they have for those creatures. And the living things that are part of their world every day by far surpasses somebody who is, impassioned by a cause to save something from dying or whatever. You know what I mean? It's not the same. And I think that awareness of that actually puts human beings in a better place. It certainly puts our wildlife and the natural world in a better place because it facilitates understanding. And the reality is most people just don't understand. And if they did, they wouldn't be so hard on people like me, because they realize, what my process is and how I live is totally in sync with the environment that I live in. And, that's... It's part of it.
It's easy for people to judge from 1,000 miles away and say you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't kill stuff, and I get it. I mean, everyone's trying to do what they think is right? Like even the people that are totally not in nature, not involved with it, they're doing what they think is ethically and morally correct and right, and is the next step in human evolution and ecological management. And they think that that's what they're right. And I can't say I'm pretty biased, and I tend to aim more towards your way of thinking, that we need to be a part of it and interact with it and be dependent on it as well. But it's interesting to note that everybody thinks they're doing the right thing, and that this huge spectrum of ideas, right, is what eventually balances us out and finds us somewhere in the middle where we should be, and we can actually coexist with these creatures, with these animals, and be a balanced part of nature, right? And you're right, we're not, because our population levels are through the roof, but we're way off beavers, by the way.
That's okay.
We'll get back there.
We can get there in a heartbeat.
We'll get back there in a second. Yeah. But yeah, it is interesting to note that even though everyone is good intentioned, we can have such different methods by which to have sustainability in the environment, right? Like it's interesting that everyone's approach and the way they're brought up and their socioeconomic status and all that kind of stuff comes into play when it comes to what they believe in and what they think is the right thing to do.
Well, it's kind of funny because, it's actually not that hard to get there, but it's just like, world politics right now and the way people are with each other. You can get to my place, and I've gotten there actually fairly quickly with people who will still listen. Even though their ideas are different, respectful dialogue actually will get you to a place a lot closer to where I am, but we seem to have lost that because we don't have that anymore.
Well, especially on social media.
Everything is combative, and it's people stating this, and, people are much more aggressive now than they were politically and socially and everything else. And the reality is that it's not real.
No.
It's a facade.
Yeah, totally.
It's been developed by the digital world, I think, a lot of it, because that's not actually how human beings live successfully together. Natural world out of the picture, just people don't live well together that way. And so that has made it more difficult to, I think, find common ground, to listen to other, because I used to be really paranoid, environmental people and this and that, but the reality is trappers work a lot with environmental, it's hard to deal with animal rights people. And I think it's because their agenda really is that, they're never ever going to agree with us on anything, because they can't, because pretty much
it's very emotional.
Their existence depends on a combative relationship with us. That's what their model is. That's what their fundraising depends on. And, firing people up by whatever means to facilitate, what their philosophy is, right? Not so much with environmental groups and the environmental movement and all that. Like, an hour-long discussion like we're having now, and then actual exposure. So they see for themselves, that makes a huge difference.
I can't tell you the number of times you run into somebody you disagree with in real life and sit down and have a conversation with them, and you start off being like, oh, you realize that you're on the opposite sides of an issue, and then at the end of 45 minutes, you're sitting there and you're seeing each other's sides and you're having a conversation. It's respectful dialogue, even though you disagree. But you're right. The internet creates a situation where it's just like, screw you, no, screw you, and it's unproductive and a waste of time. But it's interesting, like you were saying, that everybody, even though we may have different perspectives, you may disagree with everything that we're talking about here today, you can still respect that we're trying to work towards what is right and what is the ethical way to deal with this, right? So,
the interesting part, the fallback position that I always have, and it always works, is take it all aside. So why don't you just come and see for yourself?
See how it's done.
And then form your own opinion by what you yourself are experiencing, not what everyone else and everything says about it, but you.
Yeah.
and then make your decision.
For sure.
And to me, I don't know. Like sometimes I get tired of engaging with people
Fair enough.
nonstop
Yeah.
at that level, and I just lose patience.
Well, trappers.
But then
are
I'll
seen
go back.
Yeah.
But then I'll go back, and because we do a lot of stuff in schools and all that, and then I'll go back and I'll talk to a group of kids, and I just get re-energized again to go back and then keep it going because, they're the easiest. Not to try to convince them, but their curiosity. They're such good communicators, and they're so curious about stuff, and they'll ask the best questions.
Oh, I bet.
About fundamental issues.
Yeah,
I've heard come out of mouths of 8 and 10-year-old kids.
It's interesting because their minds haven't been warped by our society yet, right? They're still coming into their own reality. So they have these questions. They're like, well, why is the sun yellow? You're like, well, because it's not actually, it's white because it looks yellow because of whatever, right? Like they just have these questions that come out of nowhere.
Exactly.
They blow your mind, right?
by adults with all kinds of complex questions about why I do this or that. It's a kid. Why did you do that?
Yeah.
And it's
explaining yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect because you're right.
Because I have to reduce everything down to simple terms, and sometimes that's a lot harder than you think. But,
no, it's awesome.
Yeah.
No, so I guess we should get back into beavers at some point. But that was a great little side piece that lasted 25 minutes.
Well, you have editing discretion. So
I do, but I don't like editing though. I like this stuff. This is perfect. That's really good, right? So like talking about all that when it comes to like beavers and the that wildland and urban interface, right? And trying to manage beaver existence, and we know we want them on the landscape to coexist and to create that habitat, but also we need to manage their existence in a sense that it doesn't come into too much conflict with our own, right? So, and I've seen things where the easy argument would be trap them, right? Or kill them or whatever. There's been people I've seen that have had interesting solutions to this problem in urban environments where, that's seen as very bad, and you know what I mean? There's too many people to really kind of try and educate the public. So they have this different way of going about it, and they create those pond levelers and different things. And I've seen varying ranges of success. Some of them have catastrophic failure, but a lot of them seem to work. How much of that type of stuff are you involved with? Do you get involved with a
lot of it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So most of when you go into a situation, you've got a beaver dam that's encroaching on somebody's infrastructure or something like that. How we go through that toolkit? How do you go about assessing the situation and figuring out how to deal with that?
First, I think you have to find the line of balance, and where is that? And it has to be done case by case, wherever the beavers are and what they're doing and what the circumstances are, and where's the line, and at what point, are the beavers going to be impacting to a point that it can't continue, right? And then after that, I basically look at what can be done to modify the habitat, but I also look at the number of beavers that are there, and I look at the habitat and I assess that, and where are we going to be in a year? Well, sometimes where are we going to be in a month? Yeah. Or 6 months, or a year, or 5 years.
Well, judging by the way how fast they build, like you could.
Well, they're rodents. They're very prolific. So they don't not only build fast, they breed fast. And in southern Alberta, even they breed twice a year.
Really?
Oh yeah.
So how big of a litter can they have? Do you know roughly?
It's not can. The litter size, I think, depends more on.
Probably
resources and territory. There's one thing most people don't realize either. Beavers are very aggressive and territorial with each other. And there's a lot of mortality every year from fighting amongst beavers over territory. So I have to look at all those things and consider, what is a sustainable level for the beavers to be here. And if it's a pair of beavers that have just moved in, they're going to have a litter of young ones. And that can range from 2 or 3 to 9 or 10. And then I look at what can be done, because a pond leveler or a perforated culvert or a bypass or something like that doesn't work if there's 30 beavers living there. It just doesn't, because the beavers will literally just bypass everything you put there and build a bigger and a better dam downstream and flood the whole works anyway. So there's no way around that part of it. So the reality is that it's a combination of two. It's what can be done to mitigate, what can be done to alter the environment to reduce the amount of damage and conflict. But in the end, you still have to decide, is management appropriate? If not at this time, when? And then it's still, even with all of our marvelous inventions that we've come up to intervene, you still have to manage the beaver numbers. Sometimes in a habitat that is, a little bit sketchy as far as the quality of resources there, it almost will manage itself, because there'll be a lot of migration from the beaver colony out of that habitat to other habitats.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and in that case, some of those devices work quite well.
Nice.
In others, it doesn't.
But it is a multiple toolkit, and you are going into this with...
It always is, and it has to be in every single, not just urban habitats with beavers living there very dramatically.
Yeah.
And so these are decisions that have to be made by someone who knows what they're doing, case by case by case by case. And that's how we keep the maximum sustainable number of beavers that everybody wants, with the minimum of conflict and damage. And without and there are other considerations too. Beavers can be a problem just by their aggression,
right,
on pets and dogs and that kind of thing, and that's an issue sometimes. And sometimes a beaver colony with adult beavers in it is in a place where it's just not very good. You know, the rating of tolerance for beaver habitation goes from 0 to 100%.
Yeah,
most of the time is a happy medium in there.
Yeah,
but
it's interesting because I think a lot of people look at them, right, and they think that someone like yourself is just a wild, crazy killer that wants to go in there and just eliminate this animal, right, and be done with it. But it's not the case. So you're trying to find that balance somehow where you and the beavers can coexist, because it's not like I'm not just going to let the beavers take over my house and flood my place because they want to live there, right? It's like, how about we manage the numbers and kind of keep them together, right? Because I would love if I had an acreage somewhere where I had a beaver in the backyard that I could watch and see the young and watch them work, because they're amazing builders. Like watching them drag sticks and pack down the mud and do all kinds of crazy stuff.
You have no idea what they're capable of.
Yeah, I would love. I love watching them. Every time I see them when I'm out hunting or out hiking or whatever, always stop and take like an hour and just watch them exist, right? And they're amazing creatures.
The reality is however, even in a city, you can have a location, Edmonton or Calgary, take your pick, doesn't matter. Beaver Lodge has been there forever, right? And there's always beavers in there. There's not too many trees knocked down. The riparian area hasn't been decimated by the beavers. The bank's not caving in, and people enjoy watching those beavers, year after year after year. The reality is the only way that happens is that if we manage the numbers there so they're sustainable. Yeah. And you'll have beavers there forever if you do that. Leave them to their own devices, and they either eat themselves out of house and home, or the damage is just literally the bank with the walking trails or the person's house or whatever is ready to fall into the North Saskatchewan River, or the storm sewers are so plugged up with beaver stuff, the manhole covers are blowing 50 feet in the air every time there's a rainstorm. Those kind of things. if you manage the numbers, you'll always have beaver there for people to enjoy.
And that's the goal.
And that is the goal. And the tree. I mean, the average number of trees cut by a beaver every year is over 100 trees per
These are
beaver.
mature trees you're talking about.
Well, no. This is the whole key. They prefer not to cut great big mature trees. That's the big our keystone cottonwoods that line the North Saskatchewan River and the Bow River drainage are necessary, and they survive all kinds of natural phenomena, floods and ice breakup and everything else. But the beavers would rather cut a 3 or 4 inch poplar than they would a gigantic cottonwood.
Yeah.
Because it's so much better for them. They'll cut a massive tree like a cottonwood. They'll literally use the top few branches, and that's all they can eat.
Yeah.
The rest is not edible for them, but they're doing it because they've already cut every other available food source.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. So this is part of the whole balance part of it. If you keep the beavers at a reasonable number, the younger growth will regenerate itself continually. And they won't cut the big trees.
And they can stay there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the beavers can stay right there. And it's just, in an urban environment more than any other, really, that's what you have to do. Otherwise, it just becomes a real conflict.
And people just get so angry, though, when they see people, messing with the environment, right? They just get so worked up, and it's just unfortunate that there's that misconception about how it all works.
Well, they just can't ever see that.
Yeah, that's part of it, right?
When you're managing in an urban environment, you have to work under the radar because it's not time to explain to every single person living there why this is done and how this is for the benefit of the beavers.
It's hard to educate the public.
Everything. There's no time for any of that.
No, for sure.
So you just work under the radar, and again, you're humane, thoughtful, respectful how you do it, and you keep the number where it has to be, and it's all good. That's
absolutely
how that kind of work is done.
Yep, no, for sure. There's one more thing I wanted to get into that I meant to get into in the middle there somewhere, but we got carried away. We got into a good little tangent, so we'll do it now. I was just thinking I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of beavers in Canada, right, and how. Personally, in my opinion, from what I've read and the resources that I've looked up and people I've talked to, is that there's an argument to be made that Canada's economic prosperity and the reason it is the country that it is today it was based off the back of the beaver, right? It was based off of beaver pelts and the beaver trade. Yeah. And so I wanted to get into just the history of that a little bit and kind of when that started, when it kind of why it started, right? I think people nowadays, they look and they think, well, why would you want beaver for what purpose, for what reason, right? And I'll let you talk about why Europeans were so into that a little bit and why it was such a big deal. Because I'll screw it up, but you go ahead.
No, I mean you're right on the money there. For human beings, even prior to Europeans showing up in North America, a beaver was a critical species for the indigenous people here, for food, for clothing, particularly in cold climates. Because as I said before, a beaver is an animal that can be got readily by a human with skill. Beaver fur is extremely durable and warm, and there's just no getting around that. It is. And the meat also for food, is in the bush. It's the most sought after by indigenous people, traditionally in historic times, even more so than bison, moose, caribou.
Why is that? Yeah,
it's because of the quality of the meat and the protein level, but also the amount of fat. And the rarest commodity in nature, in the wild, is fat. Because most wild animals don't have very darn much of it.
Very lean.
Because it's. And so beavers are the exception. And that's why it's so the amount of calories to survive in a cold climate, it's a calorie game. How many calories are you burning to acquire calories to survive? That's why so many animals die in the winter and don't make it. because they lose on the calorie game.
They starve, basically.
Yeah.
It's interesting that I've read some accounts of like mountain men back in the day, right? That were trappers and existed. They're part of the fur trade, and a lot of them seem to say that their favorite meat was beaver tail, because it's not even meat; it's mostly fat, right?
That's right.
It's all, and I can't even. So, and the way it was described to me was exactly what you said. It was a nutritional deficit that people had from living off the land for so long that they couldn't get their hands on fat per se, right? And this beaver tail was something that satiated that nutritional requirement, right?
Exactly.
And I imagine it's the same for wolves and bears that take them down too, right? It's probably a huge win-win. So it's
In the boreal, we're off topic a little bit, but in the boreal forest, you see bears and wolves in the summertime when the pack is kind of broken up and it's the breeding pair and the pups and all that. If they can get a den set up near a drainage with a lot of beavers on it, they do it.
Yeah, for sure.
For a very simple reason.
Of course.
Yeah, that the benefit for raising young and having all that protein available in one location, rather than have to burn calories hunting all over the countryside to kill something. So in terms of when explorers and European civilization came here, and they interacted with the indigenous people here, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. Initially positively, I think. Over trade and that kind of thing. Well, immediately they recognize, wow, like, the fur garments and everything they had, that like this was a tremendous commodity. There was other stuff here, but fur immediately was recognizable, and that was the beginning of the fur trade. And it literally took on, it shaped not only the cultural, but the economic, the political. Wars were fought over fur here. Politics was all about control of fur resources, but also because at that time most of the Europeans were traders, not trappers. That changed, but at that time it was the indigenous people were harvesting a lot of the fur originally, and it became a business and a market, and it was tremendously lucrative. And so it changed the search for more fur resources. Saw, number one, the setup of our infrastructure along major river courses all across this country and the Great Lakes, and all of that was to facilitate trade with indigenous people and for the exploration to find more fur habitat. But also, I think the relationship and because that industry was so much about being industrious and working hard and all those kind of things, it kind of developed what later became a lot of the cultural identity of the people that live in Canada.
Right.
And that's why, the beaver is our national animal. Yeah, because they, because of the fur trade, and that's what built the original economy of this country was for fur. But also the beaver kind of encapsulates the type of person that would, make their livelihood would be spent trapping's hard work. Don't kid yourself. Yeah, it's hard work all the time, and it is persistent. And you have to be, adaptable and so I think that some of the traits that came out of the quest for fur in this country kind of rubbed off on the people. I mean, the people that stayed here and made this country were built around the fur trade, and so that's kind of what our culture is built around too.
Totally.
And a lot of that
it was they wanted a lot of it in Europe, right? It was the like they wanted it for, it was the hats, something about the
felt
for the hats was super it was perfect for it for whatever reason. So it was a huge.
Well, it was just such a high quality. Like even the holdover for that is still the very best Stetsons, cowboy hats, are still made out of beaver felt.
Right.
Because it's the softest, it's the most durable, it's the warmest, it sheds water, it does everything, right? Mm-hmm. And and it became a fashion thing, mm-hmm. and all fur did, right? Mm-hmm. But beaver, the quest for beavers was more over beavers for felt to make hats because they were so fashionable in Europe. And so the impact, the exploration of this country, especially Alberta, it's not a coincidence that every major town and city in this province is built on a river. And the oldest one, historically, is the furthest north because that's where the best fur was. Mm. And that's Fort Chip on the
northeast side
on the Athabasca Delta on Lake Athabasca.
Yeah.
And that area actually provided a gateway from the Athabasca drainage to the Peace drainage through the Riviere de Rocher into the Slave River, and it was a gateway community for the north, and a tremendously rich fur area there. So, and that's how it started, and the significance of that can't really be overstated.
If nothing else, you have to respect the fact that that's the reason that we are as prosperous as we are today, is to start from there, right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways to approach, those early times, because there was all kinds of poor interactions with Indigenous people and all kinds of horrible things that happened. And I mean, you have to look at it from one topic at a time because we can get carried away, right? But I think it's important to point out that without the fur trade, this would not be North America would not be the place that it is today. It would be a different place. And it's amazing to think that all that is on because of this one animal, right? This beaver, generally speaking. I mean, there's fur for everything, but the beaver seemed like it was the economic driver. It was
it certainly was from the late 1600s through to the late 1800s. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And for northern communities and even isolated rural communities, where I live in the Beaver Hills, the North Cooking Lake, east of Edmonton, which is kind of a really distinct ecological area there, and they don't call it the Beaver Hills for nothing. And the reality is, when the Great Depression hit this province, there was all the people who the farmers and ranchers in that area, what got them through in that area was fur. Because there was no money for anything else. There was no cash at all, and their entire cash income came from trapping in that area. And that carried through, it's still actually true today in northern communities and more remote communities. Still the only cash income available for a lot of Indigenous people living on the land is still from the fur trade.
And that's their history, that's their tradition, that's their culture, right? It's part of it.
Well, the interesting thing is that the roots of the traditional bush culture of Canada are still closely held and protected in the trapping culture, because that's still what keeps people on the land, and it keeps a lot of Indigenous people in touch with the land. And there are actually initiatives right now facilitated, between the Alberta Trappers Association, the Treaty 8 Trappers, all of that, jointly for youth and all that. For a lot of Indigenous communities that have lost their way and to their cultural tradition, the path back to that is most easily done is through trapping. And so the value of that is not just in commercial fur harvest. It's a lot more,
right? Like colonizers did it for 300-400 years, but Indigenous people were doing it for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, right? And so it's deeply part of their culture. So everything
that you do to facilitate being on the land, if you're a trapper, you also have to feed yourself, clothe yourself, have build shelter, acquire food other ways, and learn how to, utilize everything around you. But, if you don't do it in a sustainable way, you're not going to be there for very long.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trappers have to be really good at that, because it's just like farming. If you just planted as much as you could and every year and every field and did everything, pretty soon you'll have used up all the nutrients in the soil, and
Nothing
that's
left.
it.
Yeah.
No, and trapping is the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's a fascinating subject, because I've been trying to find someone to talk about beavers for a long time, because there's such a there's so many angles to it, right? And there's so much involved, that the balance of trying to discuss their importance as well as our balanced coexistence with them, right? It's hard to find somebody that has that balanced view, and I think you did a perfect job.
Well, I think for beavers, just their existence, no matter where they are, because they're so readily visible by what they do in the habitat that they live in.
Yeah.
It's important, because especially in urban communities, that they put people back in touch with something tangible that they can see and look at and think about what is our connection to that animal that is still here after all everything that has happened, in our country and the fur trade and everything, and this animal endures, and it's still here, and it can be right here in our town or city right in front of us, and that makes people think maybe about things they should think more about.
Absolutely. You want them around. You want people to be able to interact and to be able to see them and to be able to ask questions about them and what is it doing and how is it doing that. And we want them here as much as possible, as long as we can. Yeah, exactly. They're an amazing creature, and I just love thinking about them, right? They're interesting. I can't get over it.
Yeah, they really are. And the more every time I'm out there around a beaver pond, I learn something new every single time by studying them, observing them, either firsthand or what they've done or what they did.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard. Are they pups? Kits. Yeah, kits. I remember the first time I heard. I think I was fishing, and I was fishing the North Saskatchewan here in Edmonton. And I just heard this like cooing, right? Like I don't even know. Can you do the noise? I can't do it.
No, I can't.
It's like, ooh, or not even that. It's like,
I don't want to try.
I can't even try. But it's it's like, I can't even do it. But I just heard this like light cooing, right? I was like, what the hell is that? And it took me a while, because the dam was just kind of looked like a pile of, not like a normal lodge. It just looked like a bunch of sticks that had been
bank lodge.
Yeah, and it looked like it had just been like washed up. It didn't even look like it was anything important. And I realized, I was like, oh shit, that's like actually the pups in there, and or the kits, I should say. And it was amazing to see that. And I saw them after a while. I was there for a couple hours, and they came out. You could see them swimming around. You see these little kits, and like they're such a fascinating creature, and their thumbs and their tails.
A mother beaver will actually hold a kit to her chest, just like a human mother would to feed the kit. They hold them in their arms. They just don't lay there.
Huh.
That's amazing.
They're crazy. Well, anyways, we should close this down. It's been this has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
No worries.
I don't think I could ask for anyone better to come on and talk about the balance of this thing, right? And just trying to get all of those tiers and all that information out there.
We strayed a little bit. But I mean, I could talk more from a scientific perspective if you wanted. But nobody ever talks about the other stuff, so I was happy to do it.
No, and that was part of it, right? It's good to tell the whole story. So thanks a lot for coming on. This was awesome.
My pleasure.
Thanks a lot for listening, guys. I hope you liked that. Bill's a great dude. Very well thought out. He really knows his craft. It was awesome to get him in, talk to him about the things that he loves. And if you guys have any questions for myself or Bill, just shoot me an email, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com. I'll make sure to get back to you. Get back to everybody. So I will get back to you. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. We'll catch you next time.